This is Greg Lai, and we're listening to the Matt Balaker Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Matt Balaker Podcast. Once again, we're joined by the voice of the Midwest, Eric Servone. Eric, how you doing?
Appreciate it. Good to be here as always, Matt.
Well, when we started this, I remember you and I were talking about getting people on who know a bunch of stuff, and we just want a free ride off their knowledge. I think today's guest encapsulates that perfectly. He's a friend of mine, but more than that, Eric, our guest today is a business school lecturer, girl dad, UCLA Bruin fan, supporter of comedic arts, founder of Affinity Investment Advisors, and producer of the must-see documentary, More Than Miyagi. Join me in welcoming Greg Lai to the podcast. How you doing, Greg?
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, I think everyone wants to know, how did you end up playing with people's money and not being shot into outer space?
That is the question. Well, being a Chinese immigrant or a son of a Chinese immigrant, my parents wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, something like that. So actually, I did go to UCLA and I had a degree in chemistry and wanted to go and be an astronaut. So that was the start. But after a couple B's and C's in chemistry, I think the doctor thing was out. Oh. And my mom was always like, yeah, shooting you into space would be a great idea. So you would normally go to the military, I guess, and you'd go to flight school. I have very poor eyes, so all the stereotypes are true. And so there was a workaround, and the workaround was to be a payload specialist and join the shuttle program and basically take up your own experiment. And so it seemed like a good idea then to finish off with a chemistry degree. My mom was a math major from Pomona. My dad was a physics major, biophysics. So those weren't two things I was going to go into.
So you rebelled, Greg, by being a chem major. What did your physicist father think of that?
Yeah, he was like,
shame to the family.
Well, I never really got to that point. He would tell me that an A at UCLA is a B at Berkeley. So that's sort of, how I grew
Probably
up.
True.
But actually, though, he graduated and then he taught 1 year at UCI, and then he became a stockbroker. So at the end of the day, I really did follow in his footsteps. So as I was growing up, he looked at charts, and he was a point figure guy, as they would call a market technician. So I was kind of raised on the markets. I know this is going to date me, but I had to get the newspaper and look at the charts on the newspaper and prices. And so I think that led to a little bit of my interest in investments. While at UCLA, I kind of hedged my bet. So I took accounting and I took some courses like that, and then worked as a chemist. And in fact, was very close. I actually got an offer to work at Aerospace Corp and was going to work on space suits. And so you can imagine that there may have been a path, but that was...
So you would have been a fashion designer for spacesuits. I like that.
That's right. But in January of 1986, the shuttle crashed. And so all those programs went away, and I ended up working as a chemist for a materials company. Didn't like that, partly because you're working with chemicals and it has a little skull and crossbones, and it says highly carcinogenic.
I'll go play with it.
Yeah. And I think my path was already certain, because when I went on my first day, they said, "Oh, you're the new chemist." And I said, "Well, where's the old chemist?" And they said, "Well, that chemist passed away because the autoclave blew up. The door blew off the autoclave."
But the good news is you got his desk. So congratulations.
Yeah, so anyway, that's a long story. Went back to get an MBA at UCI, and then started working at Pimco. So my first job was an appointment at Pimco.
Yeah, and weren't you an equity specialist at Pimco?
I was, and specialist, that's the title they give you before they can really give you a title. But yeah, I was an equity specialist. I was a quantitative specialist. So I used numbers to convince people that I was smart.
Didn't work.
I know.
So yeah,
I worked on my wife though. So
well, good ROI there.
Yeah.
I know several people who've worked at Pimco and far fewer that liked it. What was your experience like?
Well, I worked there when it was relatively small. So it was $10 billion and had just
a wee startup.
Yeah, it was a wee startup, launched in the 70s. I joined in the late 80s. So I didn't really experience some of the drama that has been experienced in recent years. So I actually really enjoyed it. They were very empowering. And I got to kind of do my own thing.
All right, do you hear that, Bill Gross? He liked working for you.
I did. Well, I was an equity guy, so we were off over there, and we didn't interact with the bond guys. You know, we were those people.
So in the 80s, when seemingly all equities are going up, did you just, was it a dart that you threw and you put all your money there and then you collected exorbitant fees, or you would do mounds of Coke and wherever it landed, you would invest in? Like, can you take us through the process?
Well, the dart is good. In fact, I was actually a Wall Street dart guy. So if people look for it,
your aim is sound. I've seen you on the telescope.
I threw the dart, and my pick was Bear Stearns, and that was only overshadowed by the guy who threw the dart and picked WorldCom. So I should send you that. I was feeling pretty good when WorldCom went down, and a number of years later, my pick went down. So.
Well, so you're at a place now known for fixed income, but you're an equities specialist. What prompted you to leave Pimco and start your own thing?
Well, there's seeds in that comment. When you're at a fixed income firm, pretty much everybody is negative on stocks, and so
I would imagine
you don't get any marketing support, you don't get any IT support, you really don't get anything. And I have to be careful. I'm sure my Pimco executives probably didn't think that way, but it's hard to grow an equity shop inside a fixed income shop. And so I thought about it, and Pimco was going through some changes, and it seemed like the right time to launch my own firm before I get fired. That was sort of the thought process.
Yeah, is
that equities wouldn't thrive at Pimco, and I would have to go look for my own job someplace else. And at that time, the jobs were only available in Chicago, New York, if you're thinking about the equity markets. And my bride to be, she wasn't leaving from California. So
there's too many beaches here.
I started my own firm. I started Affinity, and I think that probably scratched an itch. Both my grandfathers were entrepreneurs. So there you go. I launched my own firm.
Yeah, there seems to be lots of people that are into investments, and they sort of dream about having their own firm and then quickly realize, oh wait, this is an independent business. It's not just about picking stocks or picking, whatever asset class you're investing in. Talk to us about that. Like what sort of business lessons did you learn from starting?
Well, you have touched on it, Matt. You're pretty intuitive, insightful.
Very insightful.
Stocks, very insightful.
Thank you.
They tend to want to be by themselves. They're doing analytics. They're going to be measured by how effective or smart they are in that space. And so building a business is very different. And I think that was an eye opener. I mean, I think when I came from Pimco, I sort of thought it was a field of dreams. Like, hey, I came out of Pimco. I'm really smart. I've got this great track record. Won't all the money just follow me over here?
Yeah, I'll open the doors and let the Brinks trucks in.
That's right. And that's not really the way it works. But you learn, how to survive. You do the presentations yourself. You understand the process. And to some extent, when you're a small firm, people are going to look for that. They kind of accept that you're not coming from a large firm. So all that kind of works as an entrepreneur. I kind of look at it in 1992, the equity markets were actually struggling. And so it was a good time to launch a business. People generally want to launch a business when the cycle is going well. But if you launch a business when the cycle is going down, you can negotiate with vendors. There's movement in the industry. So it wasn't a bad time to launch a business.
And what was the differentiator? Like what was the secret sauce that would get people to park their money with you?
Well, I think the industry was different than it is today. So there was a certain amount of people that were looking for smaller managers. Though I think that the big part of the success that I had was I had two parents that were willing to loan me money. Nice. And I had Mr. Visa and Mr. MasterCard, because these things always take longer and more money. So patience and perseverance is something that you have to have. You have to be able to communicate your project, your widget. Mm-hmm. We were different. We were a quant manager. And so a lot of what we sort of spewed as our propaganda was risk management. And even today, people lose track of, well, you know this, Matt, since your background, correlations, diversification, some simple things.
Why aren't I making more money? That was always my favorite question.
Yeah. Well, you could lose more money is the response. So
yeah. So you've been able to do this for decades, and you're still a very young man. What do you think has contributed to your longevity in the financial world?
Well, I didn't realize it, and as I look back, I think this is something that I was able to do, and I sort of counseled the daughters, being the girl dad, is you kind of have to dismiss current logic. You have to be a little bit different. You have to, and this is a cliche, you have to think outside of the box. But you have to be able to change, and so the ability to change within the industry has kind of helped me survive. The industry has changed quite dramatically. So change, if you can embrace change, then you can survive. I actually we were bought by Morgan Stanley. So during the financial crisis, I was sort of in a safe harbor. So being lucky is also something which I've been lucky about. But I think also a passion for the business. I've had good mentors. As you know, and you and I have spent a lot of time. You and I aren't afraid to ask questions. Mm-hmm. I've sort of used that up, maybe almost to the limit, but
no, you have at least 17 more. So use them wisely. People
that are in the business, that if you're willing to ask them questions and get them to sort of be open and honest with you, you have to be able to be thick-skinned, and you've got to be able to have Matt Balaker make fun of you in front of all your closest
That's essential.
friends.
Yeah.
If you can do that, then because you can't get overly serious. You can't be an ideologue.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, are you kind of at your core a value investor? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking about writing a piece. It's sort of like, are you a dog person or are you a cat person? And investments, it distills down to really two methodologies. Are you a mean reversion person? Mm-hmm. Are you a momentum person? So, if you play blackjack and the dealer's beating you at 21s, but you keep on going because you think she's going to go through a streak of busting, then you're a mean reversion type person. So mean reversion is value. So you sell something that's high and you buy something when it's down and when it's cheap. And everyone is sort of inherently like that. My wife is a wonderful value investor. She knows when that purse is cheaper or when that food is cheaper, or she's very good at value assessments. But when it comes to investing, it's interesting. People want to buy things when they're going higher or when they've gone even higher.
Absolutely. You don't want to miss out.
Yeah. So I'm a value investor. That would be true.
But you're a value investor in a time where we've had seemingly consecutive bull markets where, what was once a value play is no longer. Like, how does your philosophy adapt? Because you've been able to stay in business for a while. Like, what changes have you gone through?
Well, I'm kind of stubborn. So the reality is I've been towing the line. I'm probably the last of the Mohicans. I don't even know if if I can say that. I'm last of the value managers.
Eric's a lawyer. He said it's cool.
Okay. And the reality is the true nature of investing is assessing the risk versus the return. And so I still believe in value because there's a return to that. It's happening actually right now. So our survival is really selling value to the people that still believe in value. And I think that's important. You can go out and sell something to people that don't want it, and you'll be wasting your time. And so I think the change is you have to really find the people that still believe in value and then sell them what you do. If you're going to go to a growth guy and say, look, I think, value is going to turn out, that's not going to work.
Yeah, there's always a place for value, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to ask a question many investors do, Greg. And how did you get involved in the Pat Morita documentary?
Yeah, well, that's about investing. And so if you look closely, I have this really fancy title, and it's called Executive Producer.
So you wrote a check, right?
That's right. That's right. And I didn't realize that, and again, it's good to ask questions before you do something, but in this case, I did not. The people in Hollywood sort of who know how to raise money, they came to me and they said, look, Greg, you can be the executive producer on this project.
You're like, me?
Yes. And so, but really,
honestly, can you slow down a little? Like,
yeah,
you're in Orange County, which according to Eric is the same thing as Hollywood, but it's not. How would these people who are making this documentary think to go to you?
That was where I was going to go. So, it is really about being the girl dad, because you take your girls to school and you meet other fathers that have girls. And so there's an instant bond to that. And so one of the other fathers actually worked in Hollywood. Well, actually, he had another job and he worked in Hollywood. I think that's usually how it works. And so I talked to him, and he, if you look at our production there, his name is Oscar Alvarez, and he worked for David O. Russell. Now, I can tell the story really good, but at the time, I didn't even know who David O. Russell was, and that's probably very sacrilegious in Hollywood. He's obviously very well known now, but he, the father, Oscar Alvarez, that I met, he worked on David O. Russell, I think it's called The Four Kings or Three Kings, and it's with Wahlberg. And so he got his
Mark, not Donnie, Eric. Mark.
Yeah. Mark Wahlberg. Yeah. And so that's how I kind of learned about the business. And he was working in Hollywood, but sending his kids to school in Orange County. So Eric, if that tells you anything, it's not quite the same.
I remember when you discussed this, and I didn't know the scale it would be on, and I watched it and was blown away. Like I didn't think it would be bad, but it was fantastic. Like how nervous were you when they were making it, knowing that, you put your name on this thing?
Well, I was affiliated with them before. So there are a couple train wrecks before this.
We don't need to talk about those. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was able to kind of understand them and know them. And I have produced a number of their prior projects. So I've spent time crossing things out of the line item. And I think being an executive producer, one of your jobs is to say no. So when they come with you with the budget, you kind of say no, no, no. And then it gets down to kind of the right size. In this case, this project, a lot of the footage and a lot of our relationships were developed on a previous project, which was called The Real Miyagi. And that's really about this master, Fumio Demoro, I think is his name, who was the teacher for all these famous martial artists, everything from Seagal, Bruce Lee, and he was a master teacher out here in Buena Park in Santa Ana. And so that documentary led us to Pat Morita because Master Demoro, he was the stand-in for the Karate Kid. So anytime you see any of the action, it's actually the master who's doing it. And then they quickly insert Pat Morita. And in that documentary, we got to learn a little bit about Pat Morita, and we got to meet Pat Morita's wife. And so the footage and the documentary, and I think for documentaries, this is kind of what happens is we had time to develop and to bring a lot of this together. From what I understand, this is what my film studies daughter tells me, is that some documentaries take 5 or 10 years where they're collecting footage and the story reveals itself in that process. And that's really what happened here. Is we started to peel back the onion and we found this fascinating man in Pat Morita, and his story, different but similar for many people as they think about their life arcs and the challenges that they face. And it was someone that, and Matt, when I talked to you, we all know who Pat Morita was. We'd seen him on TV. And I think if you didn't watch this documentary, you would view him very differently until you watch the documentary and you see the challenges that he had to face and had to deal with.
Yeah, I loved it. And I thought I knew a little bit more about him because decades ago, I took classes at the Groundlings. It's a pretty famous like improv writing school in LA. And Pat Morita was one of the alumni there. And I was like, oh, wait, he's more than Miyagi. And then when I watched, your documentary, I had no idea, like, not only his personal demons, but, the kind of trials and tribulations he went through. And it was so eye-opening. So thank you for making that. And what was it about him that surprised you the most, Greg?
Well, it's the highs and lows that you don't get a sense of even when you meet your own friends or family, and because you're in that moment. And he probably didn't view them necessarily as huge highs and lows, but he was a family person, but the family had its own highs and lows. But his ability to make his future and to channel his talent into what he wanted to be, which was an entertainer. And to some extent, all of us are entertainers, whether we're entertaining for the public or we're entertaining our kids or we're trying to be examples for our office. He was very obviously intuitive. He was probably a little bit before his time. His success, what were his failures, probably should have been successes. When you look back, even today, I hate to say it, but when I see some of the Asian actors, I sort of look at them and I say, well, wait a second. There was someone before you, and who made it, but there was a cost, and there's always a cost to these things, which we don't see. So that's a little bit of what I sort of feel that I was a little bit sad for him in the end, I think, and him getting ill and not being able to pass on a lot of that experience, which is sad. Yeah.
Yeah. So Eric, you just watched it this weekend, right?
Yep. Yeah, I loved it.
What was your knowledge of Pat Morita before seeing it, and how does that compare now?
I knew him primarily from Karate Kid as Mr. Miyagi. I knew him from watching Happy Days reruns as well. So I knew him a little bit as Arnold. Otherwise, I knew nothing about him. I had no idea he was a stand-up. I had no idea how funny he was. I mean, you saw some of that come out in Karate Kid and as Arnold, but I had no idea he had that formal background as a stand-up. And I think that's the beauty of any biographical documentary, is that the whole idea is you might know this person from one specific little area, but they're a full, complete person with, like you're saying, Greg, with the ups and the downs. And so it really filled in the gaps of this person who I only knew very narrowly.
Yeah, and I think you see them as real people, and you can relate that to maybe your life. I also think, when you're out and you're harassing celebrities, you start to think, my gosh, what must they really be going through? And anytime I call Matt, I really want to know what's really going on, and
yeah, I just tell him Coke and whores. That's my go-to. I remember Greg and I have a mutual friend, Paul Ogata, is a hilarious stand-up. And I'm not just saying that because I hope he subscribes to this podcast, but when the documentary came out, he told me, Paul said that he was doing a weekend at some club in Hawaii, and Pat Morita was there, like shit-faced. And he said, like, I heard, he said this to Paul afterwards, I'm like, I heard you were really funny from so many people. They were all wrong. And he just goes, and then they hung out. He was obviously kidding. But I just thought that was one of the coolest stories I've ever heard. So thank you, Paul, for sharing that. And Greg, you know, we really started this podcast to kind of help our friend Eric here, because he's a corporate attorney by trade. And now he's on this podcast. So things aren't going exactly as planned. But one of the many things I admire about you, Greg, is you have balance. You know, you're a successful financial advisor, you're a lecturer, but then you also do stuff like not only be on this podcast, but like produce films. You know, what advice would you give to Eric and people like him and me, frankly, that are like trying to find that balance?
Well, I don't take all the credit. I've married well and got lucky, and so she keeps me balanced. I will tell this, that the way these kids grow up, they take you down a couple notches. I've got, you know, even when they were, you know, young teenagers. I mean, I think you have to be thoughtful. You kind of have to live in the moment. You have to take a breath and kind of reset. And that's an action, explicit action. But I think you know, my parents keep me grounded, you know, and things like that. So maybe it's making sure that you surround yourself with people that truly do care about you. I've got a lot of great friends. Golf's a very humbling game too. So I do a little bit of that. I think it's just, I tell people that there's a couple states, you know, there's what you know, and this is not original for me. I think this was from, you know, one of the politicians, but there's kind of what you know, and that's a really comfortable state of mind. You know what you know, and you know what you don't know, and that's another very comfortable state of mind, right? We can dwell in both those states. But you really don't thrive and enjoy life until you start to dwell in the state of what you don't know in that world. And that's difficult. There's a lot going on there, fear of failure. But, you know, reaching, and I would tell you that I feel like I wasted a lot of time and energy on chemistry and sort of doing what society thinks you should do. I think self-expression is really important. That's why I admire you, Matt, and now you, Eric, as you go down this journey. I would have taken dance and acting, not chemistry, and I really believe that if you can attenuate with people, and if it takes acting or expression, and elicit more of an intimate emotional interaction. I know that seems really deep, you know, for a guy who's a chemist, but that's how. It's not easy. You know, a lot of times my wife's talking to me and she'll ask me to repeat what she said, and I'm like, I don't know what you said. So that's a bad thing, Matt. That's a bad thing.
So you have the willingness to take on you know, these seemingly outside the box projects. What's on the radar? What are some future goals you have, whether it's in investment management or entertainment or some other sphere?
Well, you know, Matt, I've been taking notes, and so I still want to expand on my stand-up. So when we produce another comedy show, we'll get everyone to come and see that. My daughter's getting out of film school, so she's kind of twisted my arm and said, Dad, you know, you're going to have to fund some of my projects. So
you're gonna have to. I like how she phrased that.
She does, you know, she now that is the difference between Orange County too, or the same Orange County. That's the daughter's like, yeah, this is what you need to do.
Sure.
Financial literacy, Matt, we talked a little bit about that. I'm involved with UCI. So I take this routine to college freshmen, typically at UCI, and teach them about investments. Most people don't realize it, but they have the most valuable tool when it comes to investing, and that's time. And it's when they're young. And the interesting thing is when you meet young people and you ask them, what do you think about investing? They usually like, I don't have any money. And I said, well, investing is not just about money. So I think I've written a couple pieces on Medium. So financial literacy is very important to me because I think people make investing far more difficult than it should be.
Very true.
And if we could solve that, then that would probably take a lot of stress and angst and things away.
As well as hundreds of jobs, but that's fine.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. The financial advisors we work with, they probably won't want to.
We want to make it complicated so we can charge fees. Well, I follow you on Medium. We definitely want to have you back, Greg, so we can get more kind of esoteric on some investment ideas. But where can folks out there learn more about you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and candidly, if you touch my LinkedIn, I'd love to talk to you and hear help you if there's anything. We have a website, but it is just a website, and there's some fancy things on there. But LinkedIn's probably the best way, and of course, I know Matt. So if you know Matt, Matt will help you know me.
I'll be the go-between. Well, Greg Lai, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. Enjoyed it.